Hello and welcome to Midwest Writers Room. Our mission is to encourage, educate, and celebrate writers of the Midwest. I'm Luella Schmidt.
And I'm Ken Humphrey. Today's Chapter Break episode features Rebecca Zornow and her latest publication, Landsome Roads, which released on September 30th of 2025.
Rebecca grew up in Wisconsin, only leaving the state for 2 years to join the U.S. Peace Corps. Her debut novel, It's Over or It's Eden, is a first contact novel set in the Rocky Mountains. Her space opera series, The Displacement Duology, includes Dangerous to Heal and Negotiated Fate and tells the story of a woman who has the ability to heal others and the intergalactic corporation that wants to monetize her. Rebecca co founded the book coaching firm Conquer Books and has been recognized as a Door County Hal Prize winner, an Appleton Sidewalk poet. Ooh, love that. And is a full member of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association. She's here today to share about her upcoming fantasy romance, Landsome Roads.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about Landsome Roads. Here's a synopsis. Real life doesn't compare to an imaginary one fueled by Dottie's favorite book series, Landsome Roads. After her obsession gets her in trouble at work, Dottie escapes to the library only to find that she's read all the romantic fantasy on the shelves. Dottie wanders into a wing she's never seen before and finds herself drawn to a new book. When she opens the cover, she finds herself hand in hand with Sorrel, who says she's Dottie's Fairy Bookmother. Sorrel is testing a new division of fantasy and promises she can send Dottie directly into the world of Landsome Roads to meet the handsome male lead, but only if Dottie agrees to help solve a late series plot problem. Dottie says Sorrel's crazy, but in true Fairy Bookmother fashion, Sorrel sends her anyway.
I really want my own fairy book mother, please.
It
Rebecca,
would be
welcome to
nice if
Midwest
they came
Writers Room.
assigned. Thank you. I'm ready for a great time. Discussing writing is one of my favorite things, so thank you for having me.
You bet.
All right, so before we dive into this particular book, let's get a little run up to this. So, according to your bio, you've done some science fiction. What made you decide to jump into fantasy?
Yeah, so I've done 3 science fiction novels so far and, marketed myself as a science fiction novel, told everybody about the science fiction I was writing, only to have what I thought was a really wonderful idea for fantasy. I'm a longtime fantasy reader, and when I got the idea, I kinda set it on a shelf for a little while thinking about it, 'cause I was like, "Well, does this fit in with everything else I'm writing? Is this the right time? Is this one of those great ideas that you have and maybe it was meant to fly off into some other writer's head, but it really wouldn't leave me alone. So I tried to think strategically about, well, how do I now switch to fantasy for this series? My science fiction novels are all pretty near future sci-fi with connections to Earth. There's a lot of thematic work around capitalism and colonialism and like kind of those big think ideas. And Lansom Rhodes, I was just really struck with these themes of like who are we as readers? How does that connect with us as writers? And fantasy felt like the right space for that.
Okay, so as someone who also grew up reading a lot of fantasy, not to put you on the spot here, and in no particular order, anything in your top three? Like, what are your top three series?
Oh, okay. Outlander, Game of Thrones, Lore Olympus, which is a graphic novel, but very fantasy.
Okay, so one thing I'm going to kick out there is a book called Kings of the Wild, which is fantasy. Kind of takes the swashbuckling adventurer saving a daughter into a whole new realm. So it's fantasy crossed over with rock and roll. Fun book to
Nice.
read. A lot of rock and roll Easter eggs dropped all throughout that book. So, all right. So let's talk about Landsome Road. So first off, since it's a romantic fantasy, is Landsome like is that going to be a play on words for handsome, or what's the origin of the name?
It is a made up word. I was trying to think about the vibe of the first book. Who is this character? Where is she heading? And I really got connected with the idea of like, in fantasy, we're so often on the road. We're hiking, we're through the forest, we're going to Mordor. Like fantasy is so driven by moving across spaces, and Dottie is moving across worlds, really going from her own into her favorite book series. And Landsome is a play on handsome. It's just cute enough. I think it gets across the idea that, this is going to be a fun read. It's cozy and humorous with a lot of romanticy.
Okay, I finally guessed right on something. Luella, mark this day. It's very rare that I get things right. So then the structure of the story itself, how'd that come about?
Yeah, I mentioned I was a Game of Thrones fan, still am. I'm eagerly waiting, those last 2 books we're all waiting for. But when the television series wrapped up, there was all of this discourse among the readers and the viewers about, was it rushed? Was it what we expected? Should we get what we expect, or should we be surprised? And I see a lot of the same things on like TikTok and all these online spaces where readers connect and they're having all this big conversation. And so I started thinking about the Game of Thrones series ending. Like, well, what would have been a satisfying idea? What didn't people like? How would they have fixed it? How would I have tweaked things? And soon that spurred me into thinking about a character named Dottie, who is a voracious reader and she gets to go inside the story to fix the plot. So it was really connected with what I was seeing in literary spaces, the kind of online discourse that we're having, and siphoning that into a character who cares very much about this series to the point of obsession and feels, that glass plane that we all do between us and the books we love, never being able to enter them, but she gets this magical chance.
So the Game of Thrones books, I think I read the first two and I ended up throwing them down. Not
Oh
because they
yeah.
weren't well, they were so well written. I got mad because all my favorite characters kept dying off. I got so mad at the author. I'm like, stop. And I ended up watching the series and I got mad
Yeah.
then too. So it never went away. But that's a mark of a good writer. He just irritated me to no end that I couldn't like anybody because they were dead.
Yes, and I think for a lot of readers, but especially TV viewers, that kind of high stakes space was really unusual for television at that time. Thinking about, well, this main character is getting taken away from the show, what's left? But I really think that George R. R. Martin has such like a broad cast of characters, like such a really in-depth world that it works on the page really well. And it is hard though when you're so invested in a series, and you feel like it's changing before you. And I think that speaks to the reader frustration that Dottie feels about this book series. That you know, I almost feel ownership as a reader just as much as the writer because I've invested so much of my imagination and creativity into building the world in my head. I feel like a partner. That's kind of where she's coming from.
Yeah, I would say just about every reader out there can identify with that feeling of, oh, that's not how I wanted this to end or how I wanted it to go. I would rather it had done this instead in the plot. So very common feeling, I bet. So let's talk a bit about the TikTok book community and what influence it had on this book.
Yeah, I got on TikTok a bit after the big wave of the pandemic. We were all on so many online spaces seeking to connect with people. And I heard a conversation on National Public Radio about this cool thing called Book Talk, where all of these readers were coming on talking about the books that they we're passionate about, making book recommendations. And was already on several places, several online platforms as an author. And I thought, well, gosh, do I need another platform to keep up with? But even just peeking into it a few minutes in, it was a really rewarding space because people were so genuine about being excited to read book series, like recommending books, like having conversations about characters. I thought I'd stick around. But over the last couple of years, kind of inhabiting this space, it has influenced my writing and thinking about, well, what is the role of a reader? What is the connection between a reader and writer these days? A lot of those lines are shifting and blurring as readers have more access to the writers that they enjoy. And writers are sometimes felt more on display in these online spaces. And like it's a very public facing role for what you're often doing by yourself in your house for days on end drafting these books. There's a lot of things that I do really enjoy about the space. Thinking about like how genre has changed and how readers make up words to try and describe the vibe of what they're looking for. It can be so hard to get exactly the right recommendation for like the flavor of book you're looking to read. And I feel like romantasy or like fantasy romance squashed together into romantasy is a new term for what a lot of women are reading right now, looking for, yes, the world building and the adventure, but also really heavy on like romantic plot lines, communication between partners, like seeing a relationship grow.
It's funny you say that. I think about writing and the relationship between the writer and the reader. And because of my own history as a business brain person, like I do think of readers as customers. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm trying to,
Mhm.
work with them to make sure I'm providing a rewarding experience, I guess. You know what I mean? In the same way that you
Yeah.
would if you were selling a service or a product or whatever, that you
Mhm.
have those folks primarily in your mind, the entire time. I think that's actually just an interesting way to think about it. And I think the book talk and any sort of social media where you have more access sort of reinforces that there's a closer relationship, or can be, than there once was.
Yes, and I think ultimately as writers, like, we stick to our guts. We write the things, the ideas that really, like, peck at us, that won't leave us alone, and, like, there are story ideas, but it is also true that I probably would have struggled to write this specific story 5 years ago because the readership landscape has changed, and that has impacted me as a reader, so it impacts me as a writer. So it's a careful balance between both of those aspects, definitely.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what your path to publication was like for this book?
Yes. So I'm an independent author. So after I did kind of a trial run with Dottie, writing a few chapters, kind of living with the idea for several months to make sure it's something that I knew I wanted to invest myself wholeheartedly in. I started writing the book on the West Chief train to the Nebula Conference in 2024. Oh, just last year. It feels like I've had this
Time is
character for a
meaningless.
long time. And I was surprised on the train how quickly her story was building out of me. I'm a very solid outliner. I like to have a really strong idea of what's happening in each chapter, write down my scene ideas so they don't, flutter away. And I have a starting point. I feel like it makes it easier for me to come to the page if there's already like some notes scribbled versus like coming to a blank page and just like going with it. But for Dottie's story, it's the book that I've drafted least, and that might just be, the result of, I'm on my 4th book. We get to know ourselves as writers through the books that we write, but I also think that it was, like, my understanding of Dottie as a character, she really helped drive the story, and I felt like I had to position less of those plot devices. She was doing a lot of it naturally. So that was June of 2024 when I started drafting the book. I launched the cover in April, and now we're almost at publication with. I do know that there are 2 sequels on the way with Dottie's story.
Any big struggles that you had to overcome with this particular one, or maybe the opposite, something that was very unique and awesome that happened with this one that hadn't happened with other books before?
This was the first time I ever commissioned custom character art. As an indie author, I choose the contractors I work with. We talk through the design brief for the covers and we make a plan. But I felt scared this time around thinking about, well, it's a bigger investment to get custom illustration. Dottie's lived in my head for a long time. This world has been in my head, and you picture it a certain way as a writer. And I wondered if we would be able to get that angle in there with the cover design, but really it turned out to be something that I didn't have to be worried about, or rather maybe I worried just the right amount to nudge myself into making the right choices along the way, because I researched a lot of cover designers, and the woman that I ended up working with was a great partner. She brought a lot of vision to the cover, thinking about the small details of Dottie's dress, thinking about, the color palette that would set the tone for the series. And it really felt like a partnership where she was giving a different kind of life to the world, and I felt like for the first time I could, lean on somebody a little bit and build something together. So it was a great experience.
It sounds like it. Wow. And this is the first book in a planned trilogy, and it's actually a novella length, right? Do you want to talk a little bit about what made you choose that?
Yeah, I think it's probably no accident that I was reading Martha Wells' Murderbot Diaries at the beginning of this process, which is a series of novellas, and now they've added a couple of novels to the series. But That was really one of the first series I read in that format, and I think we're seeing novellas rising. There have been a couple of standout standalone novellas, like The Tusks of Evolution, which is about like bringing mammoths back via DNA, kind of like Jurassic Park, and seeing these stories take hold in the science fiction and fantasy world made me think of how rewarding it is as a reader to read something that feels a little bit more like a serial, like you're left on a cliffhanger, you're eagerly waiting, and you have that space between books to kind of imagine what's going on, what the storyline's going to be like. But it also, with being a kind of cozy, humorous, romantasy, it felt like a novella was the right format for that, where we wanted to be kind of self-aware with the book, like make a nod to some of our favorite tropes. And it feels like brief reading is good for that kind of writing.
Nice.
Tangentially related to what you just said about dinosaurs, I just read that scientists are attempting to bring back the dodo bird by crossing its
Oh,
genetics with, I think, chicken cells. So
Okay.
that's
Half
about,
dodo, half chicken.
yeah, that's about my contribution to this section of the program. So Luella, should we dive right into the reading?
that's right. It's everybody's favorite part. Rebecca is going to read a little bit of Landsome Roads for us. Tell our listeners where in your work you're starting to kind of orient them, and take it away when you're ready.
This comes from chapter 2 of Landsome Roads, when Dottie meets her fairy bookmother. The book slid out thickly, as if caught on the shelf. It was heavier than I expected. A floral musk bloomed in the air. I ran my hand over the front of the book. It was covered in beautiful Celtic knots, hand painted on the leather. With details like that, I couldn't imagine how valuable the text was. There was no title to tell me what I'd chosen. I opened to page 1. And suddenly there was a woman, shorter than me by a good measure, holding both of my hands. I took in her straw colored hair, the eager smile on her face, and yelped. I slipped from her grasp, but she only took me by my elbows as if we were old friends. Dottie, the woman sang with joy. I'm so sorry, I stammered, though I didn't exactly know why I was apologizing. My eyes flashed around the room. Where was the book I was holding? I didn't see anyone else back here. Do we know each other? Yes, we do, the woman said confidently. We both love reading, remember? Right, I said quickly, trying to keep up. Have you read anything good recently? It was the only question I could think of that didn't expose my ignorance. I must have met the woman at a book event but forgot her face. Drat, was she on the local book festival board? The woman dropped my elbows, folded an arm across her waist, and tapped a finger from her free hand on her chin. She was older than I was, perhaps her late 30s. I noticed for the first time she was wearing what had to be very expensive khaki colored separates, a crop top, drapey pants, and an oversized blazer with a stylish lapel. It was form fitting where needed and flowy everywhere else. No, she wasn't on the book festival board, and I had never joined a book club. I didn't know where I could have met such an elegant woman, unless she was the friend of a friend, someone I had been introduced to at a bridal shower years ago. I have, in fact, the woman said. I just finished Landsome Roads. Book 5 was such an odd ending to the series, don't you think? It was as if Landsome Roads was personally designed to haunt me. I smiled weakly as I tried not to think about the previous night's phone call of doom. Regardless, I agreed. The series ended in a weird way, especially for a book that otherwise targeted women looking for moderate drama, a hunky male lead, and a happily ever after ending. Instead, book 5 read like every other military fantasy written for men. The woman continued, I mean, where was all the romance? It was as if those scenes were completely stripped from book 5 and replaced with gory battle ones. And for the queen to desert Ironclaw like that was quite the vibe shift. I nodded, becoming interested despite myself. I had given this a lot of thought. In book 3, Ironclaw was presented to the queen for the first time, and they quickly fell for each other and got engaged in book 4, only to break up in book 5. Many people, read online forums, thought Sherry Whitehorse was responding to criticism, trying to make the series more unpredictable. Well, the woman said conspiratorially, you know Sherry Whitehorse is a pen name, right? My literary antenna tingled. What? No, I hadn't read that anywhere else. It's a very well guarded secret. The publisher has certainly kept it under wraps. Why do you think she did so few signings? It was true. I tried to find a signing to attend. I'd even been willing to travel, but they were few and far between, held only in select cities and sold out as quickly as they launched. Even on the forums or social media, it was impossible to track down someone who'd met Whitehorse in person. Wait, you said did? The lovely blonde in front of me licked her lips, fuchsia lipstick undisturbed. She leaned forward. Honey, I'm sorry to tell you, the woman who wrote as Sherry Whitehorse died after book 4. My heart dropped. I always thought, some way or another, I thought I'd meet the author who created the world that meant so much to me. Tell her how she changed my life. Guilt washed over me. I'd spent the morning resenting my fascination with the series, her art. That's awful. And you know what that means for book 5, right? Pages fluttered in my mind. It was a different writer. A man, she squealed. I brought my hands to my cheeks. That explains so much. Do you think the final TV season is going to stick to the books? I hoped not. That's what they're discussing now, the tiny woman said. The way she said it, though, it was as if her voice was dripping honey. No way. You heard something about production? Heard? Honey, I was there. At the filming of Landsome Roads? How was that even possible? I brushed a fluff of brown hair out of my face. You were on set? I'm sorry about this, but how do we know each other again? How do we know each other? Honey, haven't you been listening? We know each other from reading.
Once again, I would really appreciate my own fairy book mother making an appearance anytime soon. That was really fun. And it feels sort of, I mean, meta, you know what I mean?
Yes, that's a good term.
Yeah. Ken, any thoughts?
You know, clearly it probably comes as no surprise that I'm not a romanticy reader on that, but I found this very interesting. When you said meta, that's what I was really trying to think about. I think about books like, was it Jasper Fjord's The Well of Lost Souls, where it's also kind of this meta look at, dropping into literary worlds. And so, different language on this one, different way of writing, but it reminded me of that. It sounds very cool. And by the
Yeah,
way,
I like.
Rebecca, you have a great reading voice for these excerpts as well. Good job.
Thank you. I was in high school forensics, so I'll have to send my coach a message.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So tell your readers where they can find more about you, where they can find more about this book.
Yeah, you can go to my website, RebeccaMZornow.com. You can get signed copies there. I have a 7 book tour coming up in the Midwest, kicking off on October 4th at the bookstore in Appleton. But of course, you can get the book through your favorite indie bookstore or pretty much anywhere online.
And since this episode is coming out today, when your book drops, you'd already referenced the Appleton appearance. I'm assuming on your site, then you list all the other appearances for your readers to find you.
Yes, I'll be all throughout Wisconsin, dipping down to Illinois. And book 2 is not far away. That's going to be coming in February, and I'll be doing more events then.
All right, we're gonna have to have her back, right, Ken?
Absolutely. Already booking it. All right. Well, I want to take now to thank Rebecca for coming on and introducing everybody to Landsome Roads. Thanks to everybody out there for hanging out with us in the Midwest Writers Room. I'm Ken Humphrey.
And I'm Luella Schmidt. Words ignite imaginations and spark change. Never underestimate the power of storytelling.
Midwest Writers Room is a production of the Wisconsin Writers Association. Writing and editing by Luella Schmidt and Ken Humphrey. Sound design and editing by Ken Humphrey. Music for the Midwest Writers Room was written by Michael Ramir C. For more information, please visit wiwrite.org/podcast. Thank you.